Thank you very much for Jonna. And I'd kind of like to start, we refer to this as copyright in the age of AI. And I think, and I've felt this while, increasingly, whilst copyright is the framework and the legal basis on what intellectual property in the information age rests, I think we're moving away from traditional forms of copyright concepts to an area of what is really the ability to have access and usage at commercially acceptable rates for every party involved. And that's actually pretty challenging to reach, which we've all found over the last few years in terms of that one. So it's like, how do we get towards this? And I kind of want this to be a very sort of positive position, because actually sometimes when you're looking at these issues, there can be a kind of, it's like you're restricted from doing things, you have access, you're paying money, and it's not necessarily always a positive picture. But I think there's opportunities in the environment we're in, and I think they're vital that everybody involved in it gets it right. Traditionally, copyright has been about you're copying an activity, and if you're working in insights, you're not necessarily exposed to a copyright liability because you're using information to, if you like, generate other information. And I think publishers will probably be seeing that actually, if you're working in that sphere with their content, you may need to have some kind of access type agreement, which doesn't necessarily exist at the moment. Added to that, the kind of, if you like, the copyright legal frameworks, generally, apart from the EU directive, which drags on and in its application, quite often are out of date. They're not fit for the world in which we live. And we all know it. The publishers know it, we know it, end users know it, but it's where we can find to do it. The UK government pulled the plug on their kind of consultation on their framework that they were putting in place, partly because actually I don't think they had a coherent approach around what they were doing. So everyone is struggling with it. And really, Jonna referred to the New York Times. There's actually currently, I think, about 130 legal actions around the world involving publishers and people who are using that content quite often without agreement. Of those 130, I believe 100 are in the US. So this is a very live issue and area. And I'd kind of like to start to get everyone's perspective on it and say, Rennie, you're someone who's worked in this industry for many, many years. You've seen a number of frameworks. You work across different territories. What's your kind of pain point on this? And, what would you like to see into the future?
Yeah, I think as a starting point for us as a vendor, what's paramount is to remain compliant. And that's the starting point of everything. You spoke about commercially acceptable terms. And that's a very relative thing to say, right? Yeah. Depending on your point of view. But, with everything happening, and there's a strong degree of uncertainty around commercial models, around how publishers want to charge for different types of use of content. In many ways, I would say we need to be proactive when we don't know what that model is and if it exists. It's a long process. It's something that we've all been involved in for the last 3 years, 4 years. We've been talking about this between the PDLN, FIBEP and AMEC for those 3 years. And I'm really pleased that we have this discussion in this forum today to bring everyone together and make sure that everyone can hear the kind of concerns, risks, and opportunities from all sides. But I would say, compliance is paramount and collaboration in the industry.
No, it's very good. Let's say, we need to find a way that this works for everybody. We don't, I think, yet know what that is. Andrew, you're going to, as Secretary General of the PDLN, have the magic answer to this question. And actually yours is in some ways a worse position because you are representing an even bigger entity around that. So I think
personally I'm in a great position because I've got my FT pension fund and I can look at this from a bit of a distance. But I think actually what matters here is to recognize that the way the tectonic plates are shifting, it does have some short-term negatives for us. It potentially has some longer-term ones, but the publishers themselves, as they see AI coming out into the open. It's not new, it's 4 years old, but they're really seeing the impacts now, are anxious, concerned, and in that environment, unfortunately, it means they look a lot harder at licensing. Licensing has always been a very small part of the publisher income stream. I think we all have to recognize, both CMOs and you and your members, that we don't have much economic sway in this. But when something comes along which threatens the business model of publishers, offers them to some extent some ad hoc licensing opportunities, they're going to go into deep thinking about what licensing is. And that's disturbing the models, which were never perfect, that we'd established between us. I think I am hopeful, though. I'm hopeful in two senses. One is that I think a lot of work is being done, partly by people in this room, people amongst my members, to create generic licensing, collective licensing solutions, rather than one or two big publishers going off and carving out their own deals. That's being done. So you've got CCC in the States doing it. You've got CLA, NLA, PMG, and I know lots of our other members, and we have 42 members in 23 countries around the world, are looking hard at this. We've been running webinars on it internally for 4 years now. It's very difficult for them to move the publishers over the line to trust and make things happen, but it can be done. I think the other reason two other reasons I'm optimistic. One is that AI itself potentially plays a role in helping build better models. I think the third and most important one is that we're here talking to each other about it, and I think that collaboration between AMEC, FIBEP, PDLN, and potentially others is going to be very important, because we are separate from the core opportunity for AI. We are a B2B publishing niche. We recognize we're that niche if we can communicate properly that we are that niche, and that niche can deliver valuable benefits for publishers in terms of compliance, in terms of revenue. If managed appropriately, then we have a chance to move forward. I think the final thing I'd say, I do remember in the Meltwater case, in which I was sort of fairly centrally involved, the big concern from the agencies then was that Google search was going to take their market. Well, it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because you're B2B players offering what might look like the same data, but wrapped in a way which is appropriate to professional audiences. And I think you should, be reassured yourself on that one, that you have got a very, very important role in configuring, training, helping, supporting, professionalizing some of the good and less good stuff that comes out of these engines. So I'm pretty optimistic about the future, but it's going to be pain short term.
I'll pick up on, if you don't mind, on a point. Oh, do you want to actually on the Google one? Or,
hey, I'm here too.
So
if you need me to jump in anytime, just cue me.
I will bring you in, but
I just have a question for Andrew, for everyone's benefit.
Yeah.
When you say CMO, can we explain what we mean? Because there's going to be different interpretations in the room.
I'm sorry, Jonah tells me off on this one all the time, and I've refused to take her wide advice that she thinks CMO is the Chief Marketing Officer. For me, a CMO is a collective management organization. So it's an NLA or a CFC in France or a CEDRO or whatever. So thank you for the call.
Before I bring you in, Todd, I kind of want to refer back to the Google point, which is an interesting one. And you're right. I think everyone was concerned around, as indeed publishers, with Google. In some ways, the reason I think Google was not the threat to our industry is that they didn't even see us. And we just weren't significant enough on what their model and their revenues are. And you almost got the feeling if somebody one day at Google happened upon this, did a Google search and said, oh, here is something that we could take the market from. And this is where I think the issue around AI may be a slightly different one.
A sense of scale is terribly important. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I don't know who's read it, but Battlefleet sets sail across the galaxy, arrives at a small planet a long way away and gets swallowed by a small dog. I mean, you've got to recognize how big you are and give way to trains. But anyway. Yeah. Todd?
Well, I guess relative to size, I'm 5'8" and 3/4, so I'm not 5'9". I'm what I would call average. But I think when I considered what we would be talking about today, I'm very optimistic about the opportunities for PR measurement, for media monitors, and for publishers. I think we've potentially passed through the darkest period for the publishing model. First there was shock, then there was denial, and then there was paywalls, and then there was leaky paywalls, and for the last 20 years we've been trying to find our way to keep publishers in journalism, more importantly, real professional journalism, healthy and thriving. And when I put journalism and news articles in the perspective of one of the signals that we measure, I get even more excited about the opportunities and the potential for success, because journalism is the truth. It is an unvarnished, true account of something that occurred and was created by a professional, just like a doctor, and some of you may have heard this analogy before. A surgeon doesn't want for his patient or her patient to die. A school teacher, a professional school teacher, doesn't want for their student to fail. They want them to thrive. Journalists want to tell the story accurately. They want to get the facts straight. There may be a bias to it, but real journalism is going to verify their facts. And in media measurement, that truth, that source of truth, is incredibly important and valuable. Johnny and the PepsiCo presentation this morning outlined that. I'm just going to look around the corner to make sure you guys aren't sleeping over there and looking at your phones, so I'm watching. I'm not hiding back here. So with GEO, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the idea that potentially publishers can unlock the content so it can be seen and elevated as a resource for GEO, that's an interesting take. But at the same time, I believe there's an opportunity that all commercial usage should be licensed. I don't think it's license only this industry or that industry or this AI company, and the rest of us can slip under the radar if we just keep our head down. I think there's a real opportunity to loosen the stranglehold on journalism and print media, elevate the authenticity and truth in what's discovered through GEO, and then collect license, fair, and fair is something that two parties have to agree to, a fair license fee for the usage for all that need to use it commercially. And again, I might be an optimist. That's where I see things. I've been in this industry since I was 14 years old, and I may die at a MediaTrack opening cocktail party at some conference one year in the future. But if we can find a way to preserve journalism, retain that source of truth, deliver significant monetization from our collective usage, I think that's a path forward. And I think I'm really excited, even more excited. I had a nice walk with Bob Johns from the CLA yesterday, and working with the CMOs. Andrew invited me to Warsaw last year for the PDLN conference, and it was so much more encouraging than what I might have thought that relationship could have looked like 2 years ago. Although Andrew tried to have me killed by a subway car rushing by. Other than that, it was a great conference. So I think working together, having the conversation, and the opportunity that exists to make everybody reach an achievable outcome that we can benefit from, I think that's real.
Isn't it lovely that we all agree? That we have that kind of collective desire. I kind of turn it around now, because if you like, I think we all have that kind of sort of, if you like, the wonderful nirvana vision of how the future should look, and it may reveal itself at a MediaTrack reception one year. I wouldn't hold my breath, though, because as we know, these things do take time. But my other concern is, what if, and we can do our paradigm shift and take a journey with the publishers, but what actually if we just become irrelevant? what actually if, people are just going and, as we've seen, putting in their prompts, getting what they need. You can. I remember seeing you do one many years ago. You did an AI report that you demonstrated on LinkedIn, and it was pretty good. It may not have been kind of fantastic, and I'm not being kind of rude, but it's the kind of thing that actually
sometimes pretty good's okay.
Sometimes pretty good is okay, and if it's pretty good and there's no commercial agreement around the usage of that, people may go down that road, and that is one of the fears I have. So, Andrew, what's the publisher view on that one, do you think?
Well, I think you're back to the Google search thing. It's sort of pretty good, but it wasn't good enough. And professionals need professional content, and they need professional moderators to make sense of some of the interesting stuff that comes out of search engines at the moment. I think the concept of small moderated, small language models is a phrase I picked up this morning, which I'm going to write down and think about. But I think the bottom line is it's about as real as Gen AI writing all the articles in the first place. Yes, you could go that route and you could end up in a swamp of meaningless nonsense, manipulated actually through GEO by bad actors. I'm sure you're all good actors in the room, but bad actors as well. And I think it will destroy itself if it does that. So I'm not, publishers look at AI and they see cost-saving opportunities. I don't think all journalism is good, sadly. I come from Britain, and I think some of the excitements we've had with some of our red tops. And I do occasionally reflect on the fact, I work quite hard to make them more money for some pretty weird stuff that they publish from time to time, which they collect in odd ways. So I think real journalism, ultimately people need real truth. Big companies know they need to be operating on the basis of moderated, carefully curated data. And I think in that sense, we all have a future, but the structures around that are in flux and need to be reestablished and worked on to make them fit for that age. And I think actually differentiating real data, real journalism from some of the PAP is going to be something that you can help with, that your clients will demand anyway. That's where you're going to add your value. So I watched media evaluation for a long time, and it's changed a lot over that period. But actually, the human intelligence that makes that real and actionable is something that you guys supply, and everyone has to respect that and enable that.
Good. And you're at the sharp end of working with clients. It's always a comfortable seat to be in. But do you share that? Do you fear that there's potential sort of replacement product services because either there's no commercial agreement or it's not one that works in the favour of the client or yourselves? Is it something that as a supplier in this market you would be aware of?
I think pretty good is okay sometimes, but pretty good is not enough when you're basing and informing decisions. And that's the big difference between a quick self-serve run a search in any of the large language models that exist, and something that's vetted, to your point, Andrew, where you have a solid methodology, compliance with best practices promoted by associations like AMEC, and you have the kind of gold standard and reassurances that what you get is, even if it doesn't reflect 100% the information that you would like to take into account when you make decisions, at least it gets 95% of the information. And when you're doing it yourself in Google search or otherwise, it's basically just, you're praying that it's okay. There's no guarantee that what you get will make any sense. And then, as we know, a lot of the times it doesn't. And there's still hallucination, and there's a lot of mistakes that can be made if you're basing decisions on that. So I don't feel that that's a threat. I also think that the fact that licensing exists, and there are a number of publishers and there are CMOs who operate and regulate the market to a degree, means that we have got to a point where, unless you have access to licensed data, and you can't do that as an individual client, you will require a vendor that services multiple clients in order to have enough scale, economies of scale, in order to make sense of that. You can't, otherwise, it will never make sense for each individual client to be buying licensing from direct publishers. Obviously, some of them are doing that, but it will be one per country. That's what we've seen, right? There's a Financial Times in each country, basically, but there's one or two. So yeah, I think we are, as a largely democratic world, in a place where there's no return, and we need professional vendors and partners like some of the people in this room to have access or buy licensed access to data and provide that certainty around informing decisions.
If I can maybe just jump in on a little bit of a thread there. The only threat that I really see is if we're talking about signals that we measure, if we can't find our way to a solution, if I am overly optimistic that we are headed towards a better model for print media and the truth in that and licensing, if we don't attain that and it stays locked down, the potential for people to look for a different signal and discount print media is real. And that would be a failure on our part. It'd be a failure on the publisher's part, potentially the CMOs. I know they serve the publishers, so they, as Andrew has schooled me, may have limited influence at times. But that's the real threat, is if it's too cumbersome to license it, if it's too expensive, if they view us as too small to deal with, then the measurement industry potentially will work around them and use other signals. And that would be a horrible mistake from my perspective.
I think that's happening already to a certain extent. And I'm sure other suppliers will see the same, that this is just one element of what we do. It's an important part of what we do. But actually, I do think that it's a big digital mix that we're working with, and not all of it is in the licensed content environment. And you're right, people will just use different measurement criteria, and they will, say that's all very interesting, and I don't mind reading that, but I'm not. It's not forming part of my kind of strategic planning.
There is a bigger and wider threat, which is some readership data a friend of mine was looking at recently, demonstrates that the under 30s, how the content's delivered is immaterial to them, because they're looking at video. They're not looking at, and they're not looking at AI particularly, they're looking at video. And I think you have to recognize that the change in readership and user patterns, the wider change, is also a big threat to journalism. I think journalism itself, though, has adapted. You look at the outliers, I suppose, in some ways. New York Times, the number of subscriptions they've got now is hundreds of thousands. I can't remember the numbers, huge numbers. The big ones have adapted, and they continue to adapt, and they invest in journalism, and they're finding models that work. The challenge, I think, is going to be at the mid and smaller size scale. And the challenge for licensing organizations, I think you'd rather I call them that, CMOs, is going to be creating models which bring everyone into the tent and make access and rights easy for the people in the audience. So I agree with you, Scott, to an extent, but I don't think that licensing models are going to influence or their absence or restrictions of content are going to influence things that much. I think what is happening, which I think will probably begin to become more and more obvious if it's not already, is that as publishers clamp down on AI companies' unauthorized access to their websites, accessing that content is going to become more difficult, and creating mechanisms to allow that access is a joint challenge for both sides of the industry.
Okay, thanks. Could open up to some questions if we have people. I'm going to start, actually, because they're from the same organisation, Bruce, so I'm going to go for Amrita, if you don't mind. She pipped you to the post there with that. Yeah.
Maybe this will be the same question, I don't know. Notwithstanding, picking up on something Johnny said as well, maybe this is your question. We heard the global CEO of one of the largest media companies announce last week that his company will now be just an input into AI company. Not a journalistic company, not a news company, but input into AI. I believe those were his words, close to. Your thoughts on that? Raina.
Does he have, how many billions of Silicon Valley money does he have behind that initiative?
We're talking about Robert Thompson.
I wish him well.
Good. Okay, Bruce.
I'm sorry, without more detail, I can't
Is this
provide
in
a
Australia?
more intelligent answer than that.
What publication? Or who are you talking about?
News Corp, I think.
I was going to ask the same question. And my question to Andrew around that was that if news organisations and News Corp and Robert Thompson has made the point that they may well give up the method of distribution and sell their content to AI companies. And if that happens, and all news and journalism is actually in the wild on AI, how does that change the licensing regime? And is there an ethical reason for publishers to actually have a licensing regime when they've sold their soul, if you like, to AI?
Well, obviously News Corp did their deal with, was it Perplexity a couple of years ago? I think they haven't been particularly happy with it. It might have been OpenAI. It was OpenAI, thank you. I am always wary of commenting on people's announcements during their results and which buzzwords they might want to attach to their company in relation to their valuation. I think I did read that briefly, I have to say, and I thought, he's expressing concern, and he's absolutely right to express concern. And the democratization, what's the aggregation effect must be a challenge, a real concern for him as he sees other people being looser with their content. And it's been a challenge always for all publishers in dealing with Google in the past particularly, is that if you stand firm against them and your competitors don't, you're disadvantaged. Therefore, you go into relationships which might not be ideal. And the answer is collective licensing. But getting an organization as big or an ego as big as the Murdoch operation to accept that, as you'll probably know from domestic Australian activity, is something of a challenge.
Didn't Allbirds also become an AI company recently? Didn't I read that article? A shoe company said they're going to pivot into AI.
Allbirds.
So I think there are some errors being made at the height of valuations. We'll see how that goes, but as Andrew points out, the Murdochs could lose 30, 40 billion and be okay. I'm not worried about their estate.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions around the room? Can't see any. We'll be summing up then, and just in a short sentence. We have this as are we optimists or pessimists around our discussions?
I'm always
I know.
glass half full.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm optimistic. I don't think it will be easy, and I don't think it will be quick. It will be process. And going back to why we are here today, I really think that FIBEP, AMEC, and the PDLN, and through the PDLN publishers, we can work on a solution that is mutually acceptable. Dividing and conquering isn't the way forward. For us as the consumer side, as vendors and representing clients, we want to be together in those conversations rather than having individual negotiations.
I'd agree. Todd?
I think your question is why with the PDLN and AMEC and publishers and other CMOs, we've tried to turn this discussion into a year-long, a 3-year process in the Media Rights Trust Initiative. The simple concept of the MRTI is to bring all the stakeholders into a virtual room, where these discussions can continue beyond the stage or the podium, and understanding what CMOs can do, how we can help their publishers, how we can arrive at a mutually beneficial target.
You've just left enough time for Andrew.
To say, we've got a lot of work to do, but fundamentally, I'm always an optimist.
Yeah.
And I think hang on to the fact that your special skills continue to have relevance. You just got to apply them differently. The Google search analogy is a good one, but we have a lot of work to do to get our way through the transition with a minimum amount of pain.
Great. Well, on that note, I will bring us to a conclusion there, Jonna, and hand it back to you.
Great.
And thank everyone on the panel.
Thank
for their
you so much,
contributions.
Jerry. We really appreciate it. That was a great discussion. You know, we've been working together with PDLN and VBEP over the last few years to really create some, you know, we've had some resources available, webinar. We will continue to try to identify areas that we can collaborate and to have some resources available that aligns with the education pillar of AMAC. So this is, I think, will increasingly become a challenge. I think there is a wait and see attitude broadly in the industry around what's going to happen between OpenAI and the New York Times, which I think creates a little bit of a challenge generally, but I think smart people thinking about it and aligned with the principles of what we're trying to do, I think that's how we're going to be able to bridge those strong relationships so that the publishers and the MMOs all know that we are all pulling in the same direction. So thank you guys so much for this important discussion. We really appreciate you. Another round of applause for the panel, please.